Hey everyone, Pastor Drew here, and I'm usually joined by my buddy Brandon, but he couldn't make it tonight. Here with another episode of All Questions Considered. So we're going to do this one as like a little teaser. Brandon and I were workshopping something together, but something came up. So I'll give you a little introduction. I'll bridge the gap, and we'll be back at it when we can to talk about the topic or the question evangelical. So I'm Drew. I'm the pastor at Spirit in the Hills Lutheran Church. And this show, All Questions Considered, is a space to engage our curiosity, to consider questions without jumping too quickly to the answer, to sit in the discomfort of not knowing or not having an answer right away, and to just really live with the question even when there's not an answer. So I hope that you'll take the time to share some of your questions with me. I would love to hear them. So feel free to share any questions in the chat. And actually, your feedback is what got us our topic for tonight. So last week for episode 2, we talked about faith and flag and the relationship between the Christian faith and America. And what does it mean? What does it look like? And one word or term that came up a handful of times as we were asking questions about the relationship between faith and nation or nationality, or between, talking about the religious landscape and the state of Christianity in America right now. This word came up again and again: evangelical. And a friend and church member, Lisa, I'm going to kind of read her words for you, mentioned to me that she'd love to hear us talk a little bit more. So your questions, whether you're sending them in the chat right now or whether you are sharing them throughout the week directly to Brandon or to me, or in whatever form and format, we love the questions. They're fantastic. And Lisa's question about unpacking the meaning of evangelical and how it comes up in politics and is used as sort of a political term, but is also a religious term. And what is that? What's going on with that? That's the topic of our next show. Like I said, since Brandon can't be here, I'm going to share a little bit about it. We prepped some questions and things, but then we'll pick back up the topic next week in a little more depth, and so that he can actually offer some of his insight into this as well. It wasn't just going to be me considering the questions tonight. We were going to bounce a few back and forth. So feel free to share your questions in the chat. We'll talk about a couple of quick things about evangelical. What is an evangelical? What's kind of the history of that word? And feel free to share any questions or comments in the chat. Love to see them as we go. But also, I don't know if you, like me, the thing that has been inspiring awe and wonder and curiosity in me these days has been these images from the Webb telescope, the James Webb telescope. It's just incredible to see the universe on display in this way. I'm so grateful for technology and for the science that has led us to this. So I shared this image. It's one of several that you can go check out to get a clearer glimpse of the vast nature of the universe and the beauty of this huge creation. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about a few questions about evangelicalism. We're going to define some terms a little bit, and then we'll get more into it, like I said, a week from today. So what does it mean to be an evangelical Christian? This is a fantastic question. This is maybe the heart of the question, right? Like, what do we mean when we say evangelical? It's used in political terms. It seems to sometimes refer to a voting bloc. It seems to sometimes refer to a certain set or subset of Christians in America in particular. And so what do we mean? What does it mean to be an evangelical Christian? I actually had to kind of go look this up because I wanted to find out. This is a question like many that we're just kind of sitting with. So here's a little bit of what I found. Here are some definitions. There's a National Association of Evangelicals. Started in 1942 on their website. They say they started as a middle way between sort of a fundamentalist and a modernist perspective, fundamentalist, conservative, progressive Christian landscape in the middle of the 20th century, and they wanted to be a third way. But they have four main distinctives of what an evangelical is, and they are: number one, it's somebody who sees the Bible or considers the Bible as one's ultimate authority. Number two, somebody who confesses the centrality of Christ's atonement. Number three, they believe in a born-again conversion experience. And number four, the fourth distinctive of an evangelical, is that they actively work to spread the good news and to reform society accordingly. Now, that's one definition that comes from one sphere. And then I think there's maybe at least two other working definitions that sometimes when that word evangelical gets thrown out to mean a group of people or a type of beliefs, it often can mean those four distinctives, right? Bible is authority, confess the centrality of Christ's atonement, believe in born-again conversion experience. I'm reading my notes, by the way, because like I said, I did some research. Believe in that born-again conversion experience and actively work to spread the good news and to reform society accordingly. There's maybe a pop culture definition. So a lot of times evangelical seems to refer to someone who watches Fox News, considers themselves religious, and votes Republican. So again, the National Association of Evangelicals has a definition. That seems like one pop culture definition. And then there's culturally, I think when kind of like the polls consider somebody to be an evangelical, they tend to look at kind of three other beliefs that we haven't really mentioned, but three other markers that are often associated with the word evangelical or with a person or a group of people who are evangelical. One is a sense of Christian nationalism. Second one is a traditional view of gender roles, or sometimes we call that complementarianism. And number three, this belief in a patriarchal authority structure in the home and in the nation, both. So there's maybe three working definitions and a lot of characteristics, and it seems to me, and we'll tease this out next week, not everybody's going to buy into every piece of that definition. But that's some of what we might understand this to be. Some ways we might understand what is an evangelical, or what does it mean to be an evangelical Christian. Do all evangelicals believe the same thing? I don't think so. Brandon and I'll talk about it a little more next week. The last thing I want to tell you, though, is maybe a history of evangelical beliefs, or even more so a more specific definition and kind of etymology of the word evangelical. There's two big pieces that I want to hit here that will be helpful as we sit with this a little bit more. Number one is sort of this ancient meaning. So the root of the word evangelical, it comes from a transliteration of the Greek word euangelion, which means gospel or good news. It's what Jesus and his followers say that they are bringing and delivering and proclaiming, the euangelion, the good news, the evangelicals, so their movement is evangelical. It's bringing good news. Interestingly enough, this word in Greek, euangelion, exists before Jesus. You can find it in other texts. You can find it in other Greek writings before the time of Jesus. Maybe most notably, what's really interesting, a particularly interesting and very close to the time of Jesus example is, let me make sure I get the name of it right here for y'all, is the Preen inscription, which is dated to 9 BCE. And it says, since the birthday of the god Augustus was the beginning of the good news, euangelion, for the world. The birth of Augustus was the beginning of the good news. Now, the beginning of the good news might sound familiar for a lot of Christians because Mark's gospel, which most scholars would agree that it is the oldest, the first written of our four gospels in the Bible, starts the beginning of the good news, but not of Caesar Augustus, of Jesus the Christ, Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus the Christ, the Son of God. Already, it's sort of a political term before it's a religious term, but then also being paired with discussion of who a God or a son of God might be. Um, this word Evangelion, this Greek word that means the good news, the gospel. So evangelical, in another sense, means having to do with the good news, being about the good news. And for Christians, for the most part, we're referencing the way that Jesus and his followers used the gospel, the Evangelion, that word, the good news. The good news that the reign of God has come near. Um, that's one way of understanding it. And then the third little thing I'll throw in, just as a brief little history lesson, and as a Lutheran pastor, is that the um, the Reformation movement, right? The Protestant Reformation, 1517, Martin Luther nails 95 theses on the church door in Wittenberg, and is talking against the Catholics. The early Protestant reformers begin to call themselves, before anybody would call them Lutheran, they call themselves evangelicals, because they felt like they were reforming and sticking close to the good news, the gospel. They wanted to get back to the grace of the gospel, but as opposed to the Catholic Church, Catholic meaning universal, right? But the Roman Catholic Church in the West, they start to call themselves the Evangelical Church. So there's a little bit of other history of the word. My hope is that we'll be back and ready to go next week, dive deeper into these questions. Would love, again, if you're watching this later, go ahead and leave some questions in the comments. That's how we got this topic about being an evangelical, or what it means to be an evangelical, and what that word is, that we'll talk more about next time. And until then, I hope that you can lean into that curiosity. You can be inspired by awe and wonder. You don't rush out of the discomfort of a good question, and that you yourselves will ask a good question. Grace and peace, friends.